Now that we've established expectations for this course and we've installed Dynamo Sandbox to interact with, let's take a look at a few of the key differences in the ways that we can make nodes for Dynamo. So here are the few of the different ways that we can make nodes. We can make custom nodes. These have an extension of .dyf. These nodes are generally limited to what exists in Dynamo. So what you can do is bundle together a bunch of out-of-the-box nodes into a little cluster that's known as a custom node. Once again, you save that as a file extension of .dyf and you're good to go. I say that this is limited to what exists in Dynamo, but you can technically embed Python scripts in these nodes. That's how you ship a package that is a Python-based package. Or you can include nodes from other packages as well, even zero-touch nodes. I don't advise doing that because you build a dependency on a package, which causes all sorts of other issues down the line. So generally speaking, these are going to be Python-based nodes or some of the out-of-the-box nodes mixed in. Next, we have a Python node. This is typically in Dynamo's canvas with a double-click edit action, and you can type in Python code to create really awesome workflows. So you can actually access the Revit API fully with a Python node, and it works really well. I have another course, you might be here from that course, about creating nodes with Python. I'll include that in the description for this lesson as well if you want to take a look at it. But essentially, we teach you how to create Python nodes in that course. You're able to access the Revit API and any of the external Python libraries that there might be. Python's really nice because there is a huge community behind it for you to learn from. A lot of people on the forums actually share Python code routinely. And with tools like PyRevit, there's a lot of Python code out there for you to kind of borrow from and look at. The downsides here, we'll get into it a bit more here in a little bit, are some of the versioning things with Dynamo specifically. Python is inherently open source. It's within the node, within the canvas of Dynamo, and it's kind of just how it works right in Dynamo. The next way is a C# node or a zero-touch import node, and that's once again compiled code in a DLL that needs to be imported into the Dynamo environment, and that happens through a package publish action. So once you publish your package, it imports those DLLs for you. In this course, we'll kind of focus on these two, Python and C#. DYF custom nodes, I have an AU class on those. I'll link that in the description for this course as well. But essentially, you can bundle custom nodes with that. We cover that pretty heavily in the Python course as well. So let's take a look at Python, the pros and cons, and how it stacks up against C#, what we're using for this course. Pros, like I said, lots of resources available. Many packages are made with Python. Clockwork, Spring Nodes, Crumple, a lot of the packages that are out there are Python based. So a lot of resources for you to choose from. Archilab has some Python nodes in it as well, and Rhythm has some Python in it as well. I also publish Python code of Rhythm C# code on GitHub for people to learn from too. So I like to use both. I tend to lean towards C#. That's my preference, but that's kind of one of the things to consider as well. You are able to make the nodes very quickly in Canvas, and they're very hackable. You double click a Python node, type in some code or paste some code and see what happens. Pretty cool in that way that you can just kind of hack at it. It's very Dynamo-y, if you will, to be able to make nodes that way. One pro is Python isn't strongly typed. What happens with strongly typed languages is you have to tell the software what you're working with. Python, you can just type in a variable name like my number equals 2, and Python just knows that that's a number. If you put quotes around the number, it knows it's a string. It just kind of handles those things on the fly for you, which is pretty neat. That's once again contributes to that hackable nature of Python. Python versions in Dynamo, onto the cons now. Python versions in Dynamo have become quite difficult to maintain. So in Dynamo 2.13 that came out with Revit 2023, they switched the Python version on us. So historically, Python in Dynamo has been a variant called IronPython 2.7. They switched to CPython 3. We cover this a little bit in the Python course as well, but most package authors lean towards sticking with IronPython 2.7 just because it's what they're familiar with. You also have access to Windows forms and things like that in IronPython that you don't have access to in CPython, which is kind of interesting. It's been kind of hard to maintain in that way. Once again, your Python code is inherently open source. If you do Python code in a Dynamo graph, it's in the node and anyone can double click and yank that code out. If you're looking to create workflows that are a little more obfuscated or hidden, Python's not really the way to go. I don't suggest doing that anyway, especially when it comes to Dynamo. I'm open to sharing all the time, but if that is something that you need to do, Python's not going to help with that as much. So that's one thing for you to consider. You are on the hook for managing how your lists come into Python. So in Dynamo, we have lists in there that we can work with. And if the list structure is all sorts of different indented lists, you have to figure out how to handle that on your end in Python. And there's a lot of ways to do that, but that's another step to learn. Traditionally, packages like Clockwork just flatten the whole list, work with it, and pump it back out. But that's not so great when you have a list structure that you want to maintain. So you are on the hook for managing that kind of stuff. This one's interesting, and this one catches a lot of attention from people. But Python technically runs slower than C# in Dynamo specifically because the engine needs turned on. So Python is an engine in Dynamo and it needs started. So that first run with Python takes a lot more time than C#. C#'s what Dynamo is built in, and it just knows how to run that. The engine's already started. Python, you're having to start the engine on the side that first time and have it catch up. In the notes for this lesson, I'll include a link to a YouTube video where I compare all the different ways to make nodes and see which one's faster. Fortunately, Python's slower on that first run, but it gets close to C# after that first run, once the engine started, if you will. So now on to C#. How does it stack up against Python? There's quite a few resources on C#. Several packages are also on C# and are open source. I keep mentioning a package called Archilab. That's from Conrad through the archilab.net blog. That is fully open source, C#. You can learn from that. I've learned a ton from that package myself, and I've contributed to it in the past as well. Great guy. He's always contributing to the community for people to learn from, which is really awesome. Rhythm's fully open source as well. That's the one that I make, and it's going to stay open source for others to learn from it. OpenMEP, so for any of my MEP users out there, that's a great package that is completely open source as well, and that's linked in the notes for this lesson as well. Another pro is you're working within a real IDE. This is an integrated development environment. It's required, but it comes with a ton of benefits. One of the biggest critiques that Python users have about C# is you have to use Visual Studio or something similar. That's a whole nother tool to learn. It's kind of intimidating. But the trade-off there is you get so many tools along with it. And with a lot of these AI tools coming out, you get prediction, code completion, and it helps you write code so much faster. So we'll take a look at that as we get in there as well. There is a deeper cross-compatibility of Dynamo versions with C#. So if you build a DLL for Dynamo, you can get it to work between most versions of Revit that are current. So one DLL can technically work in up to 4 versions of Revit or more. Rhythm, for instance, the same code base works in Revit 20 to Revit 24, which is pretty neat, and it's easier as a package author to maintain in that way. Python, you will have to tell your users to install an extra package. It's called the Iron Python package for Revit 23 and higher, and it's just kind of tedious in that way. C#'s inherently what Dynamo wants you to use. They won't say it, but that's how Dynamo's made, and it just works better in that way. Your list management is also built in for C#. So as mentioned with Python, if you have a jagged list with a bunch of indentations, how does Python handle that? You have to make that work. In C#, it just runs. List management is non-existent in C#. It just happens for you in the same way that the out-of-the-box Dynamo nodes work. Really awesome. You can build a C# node that's supposed to work with one item, and a user feeds in a list with 50 items. It just works. The compiler handles it, and Dynamo just knows what to do, which is really awesome. On to the cons. Debugging is a little bit more difficult because we are compiling our code into a DLL. We are having to compile it each time, open Revit, open Dynamo, test it, close Revit, close Dynamo, edit it, compile it. It starts to get a little tedious in that way. Visual Studio, which we'll be using, 2022, does have some features to let you dynamically reload it without closing Revit, but it is a hit or miss, so that is something to keep in mind. C# is a strongly typed language, so you have to tell C# what an element is before working with it. There is a concept in C# called var, which we'll go into as we're writing code, where you kind of let it handle it for you, but if you want your code to be consistent, it's better to kind of indicate what you're working with. So if you're working with a wall in Revit, telling C# that it's a wall is beneficial to you because you get access to a lot of properties of walls and things like that. It is a bit slower to develop because you have to start a project in Visual Studio. So once again, you are in an IDE, you have to build a project and have all that stuff written to be able to compile your code. You're not in Dynamo just double clicking on a Python node and typing code. So it is a little bit slower in that way, but the benefits you do get in speed for writing the code are so great. So that's something else to keep in mind. With that being said, Python really is an awesome language to learn. I think everyone should learn Python. It is a very valuable skill, especially with the Python interaction in Dynamo being so smooth and tools like PyRevit existing. But if your ultimate goal is to create Revit plugins, C# is where you want to be. A lot of people really embrace Python and they build full ribbons with Python, which is amazing. However, Python isn't something that's built into Revit by default. So that's always where my concern's been, is when you're using Python to write your Revit plugins, you are building it on the backbone of a tool that's external to Revit, PyRevit in this case. And that's kind of a hard place to be because you are building it on something that you're relying on someone else. A little story, years ago I worked at a warehouse where we shipped groceries and all these things, and I trained people on how to pick boxes fast and all these crazy things. I would always tell people, if you're having to wait for someone to help you lift a pallet or something like that for more than a few minutes, you need to stop. Because if you're going to have someone else be responsible for how well your productivity is doing, you're in trouble. I look at kind of Python that same way. Unless you're building the toolkit to make it to where your ribbon loads, it's one of those things that could have an expiration date that you don't pick. C#, Revit just handles C#. All Revit plugins are in C# and they just work. They've worked like that ever since Revit had plugins available, as far as I know. So knowing C# is a really great place to be because you're future-proofing your plugins. Furthermore, if you're building for future versions of Revit, if you're on that kind of pipeline, you're able to test your plugins very quickly in the future versions of Revit because it just handles C#. If you're within those beta portals and things like that, you are able to bring your plugins into that environment and test them. If you're writing Python and you're dependent on an external tool, if it doesn't exist for the newer version yet, you can't test your tools yet. So that's another thing to keep in mind. With all that in mind, I am very excited for you all to start learning C#. Those are the different ways you can create nodes in Dynamo, and we'll take a look at setting up our Visual Studio environment and all those things in the next lessons, and we'll see you there.